Hey guys, welcome back to Autodream Tech Tips. Today we're going to show you how to measure your cylinder bores and mainline bores. This way you can double check your machine shop's work. So the tools you're going to need to have are your ARP head studs with the proper lube, lube for your mainline bolts, torque plate with proper gasket matched to what the engine will be using. This is not the gasket being used, this is just for torque plate use. You're going to need your mainline bore gauge long enough to reach all the way through the block. You're going to need a small file, I'll show you why in a bit. You're going to need your cylinder bore gauge, piston spec sheet, micrometers, thermometer, and you're going to need your torque wrenches. So the first thing you're going to want to do is clean your bores before you stick your bore gauge in there, just to not scratch the cylinder bores. I like to use ATF on a blue shop towel. It's lint free, it doesn't scratch the bores, and you're going to want to wipe it until basically you pull it out and there's no dirt on there. So you can see the discoloration here, there's red and just some brown. That browning, that's the dirt. You want to make sure there's none of that when you're done. So when you think you're done cleaning it or you've been doing it for a while, just to make sure you are 100% clean, just take a clean cloth again, put some ATF. Make sure you go side to side and up and down, and you'll know you're done when the cloth comes out clean. Main reason for this, not only you won't scratch your bores when you're using the bore gauge, but this will help properly seat the piston rings. So you're going to be taking out any metal shavings remaining from the final hone. So a little bit of brown in there, so I'm going to have to keep going at this for just a little bit more. Another thing you want to make sure is your threads are clean in here. So when you put your ARP head studs, they actually do bottom out all the way. The head studs are supposed to be in the block only hand tight, so if there's any dirt or grime in there, it can be hard to know if they're actually all the way to the bottom. So once you clean them out, you'll know for sure. Then you're going to install your torque plate, so you'll want your gasket, and you won't be able to reuse this gasket, so if you want to check your block with a torque plate, you're going to need a spare gasket. So we'll put that on. Put this torque plate on. I like to put the studs after. If you have all the studs in, you slide that in. The studs can actually scratch against this aluminum torque plate or even with your head and cause some metal shavings to go on the cylinder wall. So now that we've got our studs installed with engine oil on the block side of threads, you're going to use your ARP moly lube on all mating surfaces and all remaining threads. So under the pin here, on top of the pin, on top of the washer, in the nut, and on the threads here on the stud itself. You're going to assemble all these and then you're going to torque everything to spec. So the reason I use a file is I'm going to make sure that my mating surface for the girdle is good and clean and flat. So I'm going to rub it against here just lightly and see if there's any high spots that I've knocked down. This way you get proper bonding of the girdle to the block and it won't screw up your measurement. So another thing I'll do is I'll take 1000 grit sandpaper, and this is not enough to take any material off, so I'm just gonna go through the journals and make sure there's no high spots. Same thing, so you get proper bearing crush. And after time, you can see here, it does happen that the block will sit at the machine shop for a little bit of time and a little bit of scaling will occur there, so you don't want that on there. So clean them up, get everything nice and clean, make sure there's no rough spots, high spots, or scuffing, and you'll be good. Once you've done the block, don't forget about the girdle. So same thing, knock down the high spots, clean up the journals. So now that we have the torque plate and the mainline torque to spec, we can start taking measurements now. The first thing you're going to want to do is check temperature. So just about over 20 degrees is where I like it. That's pretty much room temperature. If you go too low or too high, the measurements will definitely go off. So the first thing you check is your piston spec sheet. Right here it says the bore diameter should be at 3.406. So I've set my micrometer to that measurement, and I'm going to set the dial bore gauge to that measurement as well. So the way a dial bore gauge works, one end of it is spring loaded and the other end is solid. It's adjustable with a lock nut and it has a roller on the end. So as you insert the bore gauge into the bore, you start on a diagonal. As you work your way down, it's going to find the lowest spot and go past it. And you're going to see this movement on the dial, and this is how you find your measurement. So this face here is actually adjustable, so you can zero out your gauge. So you're going to do the same thing in between the mic anvils. So basically, rock it back and forth. This can get really finicky. You'll develop a touch for it, but this is how it's done. So you rock it back and forth, and you're going to zero out the gauge. So I've pretty much zeroed it out already, and we're good to go. So now that you have your dial bore gauge set up, you're going to want to take multiple measurements. So you're going to want to measure out of round, and you're going to want to measure taper. So different heights in the cylinder bore. So we've set it for spec. So we'll take our first measurement. You want to rock it, and then as soon as the needle goes back, that was your measurement. So that was the smallest point. It's right on spec right there. So we'll go down a bit more. Same thing. And this one has 1/10,000th of an inch bigger. Not even. So this is perfect. You don't want to be more out of round than 2/10,000ths. This one's 1/10,000th bigger. 1/10,000th bigger. 1/10,000th. So there's no taper, there's no egg shape. The cylinder bore is perfect. So you're going to do that to every bore and make sure. So we're ready to take our mainline measurements. The girdle is bolted down the spec. It's room temperature. It's also clean. We're going to do this with a Sunnen mainline bore gauge. This thing is 2 foot long. It's also retractable on the end where the probe is. That way you can actually fish the dial bore gauge through the main line without fighting your way in and out. This is very important, especially when you're measuring bearing clearances, because you don't want to be scratching the bearings on your way in and on your way out. So same thing, just with the retractable end, it also has a tensioner here. So when you tighten that up, it's going to tension up the spring. If you're taking a sideways measurement, this is going to help you out because it's not going to fall down and give a false reading. So after you've measured all the journals, make sure you measure them in multiple spots. So on the sideways, on the vertical, diagonal, just to make sure there's no snaking in the main line, to be sure there's no machining that needs to be made. Or if it was machined, you want to make sure it was done properly. After that, and it checks out, you're good to go. You should be able to disassemble it, paint your block, or do whatever you want to do, leave it if be, and build the engine. So hopefully this video has helped you understand a little bit more how to double check the machine shop's work, to be on the safe side of things when you're building your block. There's a couple more things I wanted to cover, like deck straightness and all that, but I'm going to do that in a different video. If you have any questions, please comment below, like and subscribe if you would like to, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.